Hey, welcome, buddy. Hey, okay, so check it out. We have a lot of stuff planned for this particular hangout, but unfortunately, it's a little chaotic because certain people haven't dropped in yet. So Jackson Week's going to be supposedly joining us here soon. Nick Suter's going to be joining us hopefully soon. I've asked Logic to join as well, but no response from him yet. But I was kind of hoping he would come in. But I got Isaiah Sloan here. Isaiah, do you guys remember Isaiah? He is like from the very first hangout I think I ever had on my channel. That's how long he's been around, but he decided to join the military, and I don't know what the hell he was thinking after I told him don't do it. But he was in the scene for debunking young earth creationism, and he's back, and he wants to get back into it. And when he's out of the military, I hope he really gets back into it, starts a YouTube channel. And Isaiah, welcome back, my friend. Man, it's been a while.
It has been a while.
And I spelled your name wrong. I'm an idiot. I gotta fix that. That's gonna bug me. So what have you been up to real quick before we get in all this, man? I haven't really caught up with you too much.
Not much. I have actually been active in the whole debate, but not on the YouTube part of it. I've been more in the Facebook.
Yeah, well, I know. I mean, I know you're on Facebook, but you don't really do much on YouTube any longer.
No,
and I don't get a chance to really talk to you that much face to face. Only through Facebook.
Yeah, I'm very active on Facebook, just not.
Well, you guys want? I mean, will you want to tell me your pseudonym so they actually know what your pseudonym is, or because I don't want to dox you. Isaiah, what's your pseudonym on Facebook?
Oh, it's Chucky Darwin.
Yeah, there you go. So Chucky Darwin. Yeah. This is actually the Chucky Darwin from Facebook, people. Yeah, but anyways, we got Jeremy with us. Jeremy, you remember came, I don't know, a couple weeks ago over when we had Cheshire here and we were talking about intelligent design, but we're going to talk about creationism today. I know you have a lot of videos out. I haven't seen your latest ones. Sorry, Jeremy. So
that's okay. I know you're busy.
Yeah, I mean, eventually I will. I mean, there's short little junkets kind of thing that you just, put it out there, the same kind of arguments I've heard, but they're mostly towards biological things for intelligent design. But we're going to be talking about creation today. By the way, you said you liked my thing here. It's
I do, yeah.
I think it's a brontosaurus, isn't it?
I don't know. I just, I don't know. Looks like it.
So this is actually what creationists generally do believe in some ways. I mean, obviously a little hyperbolic, but they do believe that humans and dinosaurs were contemporaries, right? That they lived side by side for each other. Okay. So let me ask you, I'm just going to dive into it, and then maybe Isaiah can kind of help out here. But, and when Jackson gets here, he can help with some of the phylogenetics and stuff like that. But what in the world made you think that this was something that actually has a historical context to it?
Yeah, so it's trusting God's word. I mean, I don't think it's more science. It's really, I think it's a faith-based thing. Just like believing in a virgin birth or a resurrection, believing in a literal or just a natural reading of Genesis 1 through 11, I believe would lead to thinking that dinosaurs and humans live together, and the earth and the universe is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old.
But see, the thing is, though, when it comes like the virgin birth and all this stuff, they at least posit those as suspensions of natural law. They posit those as some kind of miracle. This is not. They posit this as actual science. The Creationist Science Museum posits these types of things as actual historical events that one can be tested for, and science can determine. But you're now saying that that's a faith-based thing. But there's some incongruence there, because if they're going to put out creation science and say, look, this is what science is going to show us, it's no longer faith-based at that point. It is, what does the science show? Do you agree that? Do you think that the science shows this?
I think you have to look for it. Yeah, I mean, of course, there was soft dinosaur tissue found, and of course, all of us young Earth creationists jump on that.
By the way, I'm going to be drinking every time that you do a little trope thing or idiom that I've heard a million times, because I like you, man. I'm going to have a little drink with you. I said before that you're the kind of guy I would want to talk to, but I've heard all these things before, so I'm just going to...
Yeah, and I know you have. I listened to one of your videos on young Earth creationism, I think from 2 years ago. And man, you're very...
With him, with Isaiah.
I don't remember who was on it. It might have been.
Well, and I was... old. Which one did you listen to? I'm sorry, what?
Well, what was the guy's name? He was the guest. It was like... Bible something. I can't remember, but you mentioned Jason Lyle. You mentioned the dinosaur collagen, and so I'm like, oh yeah, you've heard all of these, and that was really
Mary Schweitzer on the show.
Yeah, so and I really thought about it, and I'm like, I believe in God because, well, first off, I just thought about it, and to me, it's just natural to believe in God. When I see complex things, I see us. And then when I really started to dive into DNA and abiogenesis and how a prokaryotic cell works, I'm like, man, I really believe in God. And then my faith in Christ came from just reading the Gospels for myself. And, even Jesus said it. He was like, my sheep hear my voice. And I know people call us sheep as a bad term, but I will gladly be called a sheep, and that Jesus is my shepherd. And so now I've got faith in Christ. So I've got faith in that we were created because of what I see in the world, and especially in life. And then I believed in Jesus, and I believe his words. I started reading the Bible for myself, and it just made sense to me. And so it's just natural to just hold on to those things. And, I really believe we need to believe the whole Bible or not. And I know you disagree because you've had some old earth creationists on here, but I think it's really important to be consistent. And I think of the movie Contact with Jodie Foster. Have you guys seen that movie?
Of course.
Where she has this, experience with this extraterrestrial, and, people don't believe her. She had this experience. And it's kind of that way with God. You have this experience. You trust this person, this being that's outside of the universe. And so I trust him on the age of the universe.
But okay,
and
he's not the one telling you this. This is your interpretation of what you're reading. God is not coming down and saying this is the case. But you had mentioned something again that I do have an interest in Mary Schweitzer's work. I've read her papers. Dr. Rana sent me his book, Dinosaur Blood and the Age of the Earth, which I reviewed from a layperson's perspective. Really good. I've had Dr. Mary Schweitzer on the show. So I have to ask you, you do know that she has said that young earth creationists have taken her work and distorted it. And she has said there's no doubt whatsoever these bones are around 65 to 67 million years old. Most of them were 67, but I think one she tested was 5 million. But they're in that ballpark. But she even said, though, is very, very carefully what she said is her paper showed how certain types of proteins, like structural proteins like collagen, could last a very long time in a hermetically sealed type environment where there's not microbial, there's no DNases to break it down, or collagenase in this case, to break down this stuff, because they did find small peptides, I think, of protein strands, and I think they found some ancient DNA in small quantities, right? They've been degraded, which the DNAs would do. But she showed a way that these collagens would be intact over a long period of time, and that was why she got a name for herself. But the young earth creationists is just saying, well, no, these things have to be young, but none of them have ever explained to me why do they have to be young, when her whole paper was explaining and verified independently through a laboratory that this was a viable mechanism by which certain things can be preserved.
Yeah, well, it sounds like they'd have a hard time testing that,
But they did test.
Wouldn't it be very difficult to test something for 65 million years?
But they didn't need to test it for 65 years. They tested it for several years and showed that this would actually act as a preservation mechanism because of the iron, the Fe2 in the heme that was part of the hemoglobin. These iron act as a barrier. So this mechanism was a very viable mechanism, and it was actually, again, shown to be the case in an independent lab. So when Mary Schweitzer, who's doing the actual work, would you say that she's an expert on this particular topic? It's her field,
yes.
Right? She's telling you, in her expertise, that the young earth creationists are distorting and lying about her. How would you respond to that when she's the expert? We're not, but she's the one saying they're just wrong. They're just lying about me at this point.
Well, that's a good question.
I ask good questions.
Yeah,
and then
because
Isaiah jump in here. He asks good questions too.
Because there's scientists who know how DNA works. They know how protein is synthesized, and they say that they think that came about by natural processes. And I know I'm not a scientist, but I'm just like, man, I don't buy that. And so I think a lot of times people see things through their certain worldview. And if someone has this worldview that the universe is billions of years old and dinosaurs, were here 65 million years ago, they're going to naturally look for ways to explain that. Yeah, I mean,
isn't that what younger creationists do, though? If
absolutely,
okay,
absolutely.
All right, so you agree with that? So younger creationists actually have to sign a waiver, a statement of faith that if any evidence scientifically goes against their narrative, it has to be dismissed. It cannot be right. So let me ask you this, and I'll have Isaiah jump in on this. I have some DNA material, or I have a protein. Let's say I have collagen, or I have something that needs to be aged, right, or to see how old it is. I give it to you, and I give it to Isaiah. You're supposed to both be objective. You're supposed to both be scientists. You should not have any preconceived notions about the age of the Earth. You need to test it for what it actually says. Now, I grant that obviously if you find something out of range, there's probably going to be a problem, right? If I expect to have 65 million years and it comes back as 12 years, I'm probably going to have a calibration issue, right? I'm going to have probably something I did wrong. Because we do have, expectations for something, because these biases are there because we have demonstrated conclusively the age of the Earth, so we know that those things are not going to be the ones changing without extremely amount of evidence. So if I give this to you and I give it to Isaiah, would you not agree that both of you should come up with the same value for the age without your preconceived notions?
Yeah.
So Isaiah, is that what happens?
Well, I mean, I really haven't gotten too much into carbon dating, but yeah, if we were using the different types of dating methods, if we were both using the same dating methods, we should come up with roughly the same time.
Isaiah?
I wanted to go back real quick. So, what it seems like you're saying is, Mary offered some sort of ad hoc explanation. Is that what you're trying to get at?
What do you mean by ad hoc?
Just like made up some sort of explanation to explain what she saw.
An ad hoc explanation is kind of a janky way of trying to explain something, because they don't have an actual explanation for it, so it's ad hoc.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So, but that's exactly the opposite of what she did. She actually not only came up with a hypothesis for her doctoral thesis, but demonstrated that mechanism would actually work.
Okay. Yeah, and I should have. I know you mentioned that in the video I watched, and I should have studied it. But
yeah, go watch her on the show here. She was on for like 90 minutes. Great guest, and she was very clear in her findings. And she was saying, I didn't find red blood cells. Creationist said that she's found red blood cells. She's like, I never made that claim. I didn't have the evidence to make that kind of claim. So that was wrong. And if you read Dr. Rana's book, Dinosaur Blood and the Age of the Earth, he goes into great detail about the structural consistency of collagen. It's a triple helical protein that is very, very resilient. We would expect it to last a pretty decent amount of time unless there's factors that denigrate it, such as collagenase, which is an enzyme that breaks down collagen, or environmental factors like bacteria, weather. But under normal circumstances, collagen is pretty hardy. So the fact that we found collagen that's, in small amounts, by the way, these were not like huge amounts, that are 65 million years old, is impressive, but it's certainly not outside the scope of science. And so do you not see that creationists not only latched on this inappropriately, but had to try to twist the narrative, because they're the ones that have a bias. They're the ones that say, we have to have this to be true. Scientists don't say that. Scientists say this is true because this is what we've discovered to be the case, through years of consilience and years of testing from various different sources. But that's not how a creationist thinks. Creationist thinks, like you said, the Bible has to be true. Therefore, any data that goes against that narrative must inherently de facto be wrong. That's not how you do science.
Steve, Bill actually texted me. He said if Jackson can't make it, he would be glad to come in.
Yeah, sure. What the hell? Why not, man? Yeah, I'll give him the link right now. Well, Jackson's going to be on his way too, but I don't want to get too many people in here. But you like Bill, right, Jeremy?
Bill
Lillo.
I don't know.
No, Bill Lillo is Bill Lillo became a superstar when he decided to come on my channel and debate Ken Hovind. He was a nobody, know nothing, just slob, and all of a sudden he catapulted to superstardom, and now he's like, Steve who? But he graces us with his presence every so often, and
awesome.
And I love the guy. I mean, he's one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. And he works for he worked at a museum, but he does paleontology and he does excavations, and he really does stuff. So
yeah. Did you have Aaron Ra on yesterday or a couple of days ago?
I didn't have Aaron on. I had Sygart on. That was the after show. Yeah.
Okay.
Aaron had a debate with Sygart on Modern Day Debate, but yeah, Aaron may eventually come on the show again. He said maybe if we don't talk about atheism and agnosticism because it's just not his forte. But strangely enough, he's an atheist activist. His forte is not atheism or philosophy. But
I'd love to talk to him about abiogenesis.
Yeah, no, I'm sure he'd be cool.
I've enjoyed his videos on it.
Actually, I think abiogenesis is hard. I wouldn't be the person to talk to about abiogenesis.
Yeah, it's a bit more complex.
Yeah, it's a lot of biochemistry that's involved in that. All right, look what we got here. Bill, while I set this up, have at it, man.
Hey, Bill, I'm Jeremy.
Bill's speechless.
It's actually the first time I've seen Bill on camera.
Really?
I've spoken to him on Facebook, but I've never actually been in a hangout environment with him.
Have you? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right, let me find where I'm at here. All right, there we are. Hi, hey, everybody.
Hey, bud.
Hey, nice to meet
I'm
you.
giving you your own
Yeah, you
window
too.
here, so.
How's it going, Bill?
Good. It's nice to meet Chucky in person, sort of, kind of. Yeah,
Yeah,
somewhat.
'cause you guys know each other from Facebook.
absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you got for Jeremy here? Because we were just discussing Mary Schweitzer's work, which, again, I mean, he even realized it's a good question. Why are creationists distorting Mary's work?
Well, right. And one of the things I think that a lot of them don't realize is that there's been 4, I think 5 now, independent studies that support her work. I mean, yeah, and
I know
even
one I read.
well, yeah, even up to as far as about 260 something million year old reptiles in like Poland, where they found iron in hemoglobin preserving the soft tissues. And one of the biggest things that creationists don't sometimes understand, I'm not saying Jeremy doesn't or whatever, but soft tissue is a type of tissue. It doesn't describe the state that it's found in. Soft tissue is organic material, but it's not found in a soft, stretchy state. Now, some people, Mark Armitage, which might be a bison horn, we're not sure, but or even Mary Schweitzer, though, have soaked something in acid, removed the mineralization, and got it down to a state where it might be pliable, but we're not describing soft, mushy pieces of steak and dinosaur bones.
Yeah, that's a good point. Soft tissue is like, it means non-bone, basically. I mean, to simplify it for him, but it's not. It doesn't mean the type of texture. It doesn't. We're not talking about the hardness or something like that. When we're talking about the soft tissue, it's the type of tissue that we're talking about that's not type of bone tissue. So collagen is considered to be a soft tissue. It could be hard as a rock, but it's still considered a soft tissue. But like you said, was it permineralized, or it was definitely fossilized. But
definitely mineralized. But inside of fossilized bone. Now the other thing is that, like, Mary Schweitzer in her experiments showed that it only took a matter of a few weeks to reach a preserved state. Now, again, young Earth creationists will turn that around and say, well, you're saying that, because it can last for weeks, it can last millions of years, and that's wrong. No, that's not what people are saying. What people are actually saying is it only took a few weeks to reach a preserved state. Once it becomes encased in permineralized bone, it's basically inside of a rock. Mm-hmm. So we know it doesn't take that long to become preserved. Once it's encased in the permineralized bone inside a fossil, what environmental pressures are going to reach it and degrade it, deteriorate it? I mean,
right.
That's a good question, Jeremy. I mean, I told him before there's like collagenases and there's bacteria, but if there's no external factor, there's no pressure on this to degrade, what's going to cause collagen not to last 65 million years?
I'm sorry, is that toward me?
Yeah.
I
feel like we're interrogating you. I don't mean to. I'm not ganging up on you, but you're the guest, and creation.
Yeah, and I love being outnumbered. I don't mind at all.
Good,
And,
that's awesome.
I appreciate this, and creationists. Yeah, we can't do that. We can't distort facts because I've admitted, I have a bias that my faith in Jesus and the Bible is what made me a young Earth creationist. Simply looking at distant starlight would make anyone believe in an old universe. So yeah, I need to study that more. And I even wrote a book, 100 questions every Christian should ask themselves. And one of those questions is about taking Genesis literally. And I mentioned soft dinosaur tissue. So I need to research that. And if that's not a something to point someone toward young Earth creationism, then I need to take that out of the book.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I can tell you right now, and obviously the three of us have done this a while. So I mean, we're kind of, you got kind of screwed on this a little bit because I asked you to bring a friend and your friend you couldn't bring a friend. So I didn't want it to be like, you got 3 debunkers here. This is what we do a lot. And so,
truth is truth. I mean, you're not ganging up on me if I want to know truth.
Yeah, I mean, we said you could verify. That's I love the fact you put that. Everything that Bill said, everything that I've said, Isaiah kind of said, you can go check out for yourself. That's what it is about my narrative against creationism, is that because they do not allow for anything that goes against the belief, they're no longer in the scientific arena. They're no longer open-minded. They have no epistemic virtue called open-mindedness because they've closed their minds. They say this is the way it must be. Now, I have addressed not every, but I've addressed a lot of creationists out there, PhDs, ones that actually write that people go to and cite. I've talked to a lot of them. Bill's talked to a few of them. Isaiah and I, we've talked to Eric Hovind a few times together back in the day. Remember that, Isaiah?
Screw that guy.
he loves him.
I've been trying to nail him down. I've been trying to get him to do a debate, but he will not respond.
Oh yeah, no, he's had his fill. Because I remember when he came on, and Isaiah and I were just tag teaming him. It was like, dude, you don't know what the shit you're talking about, man. You're just
If I could add something about the dinosaur tissue, one thing that gets ignored a lot is the actual evolutionary implications of what Mary found. The specific type of tissue that Mary found is called medullary tissue, and it's a reproductive tissue that is, what's the word for it? It's specific to birds.
It was osteocytes in the medullary pelvis region that she had used. She had checked for ostriches, and she determined that it was actually pregnant at one time. Was it medullary?
Yes, medullary tissue. It's specific to birds who are, I think it's ovulating, I believe.
Yeah, because they have when they ovulate, they have certain hormones that change the bone structure density on the osteocytes.
Yes,
something along those lines. Again, I'm not a biologist, Jeremy, but I did read the paper. And this is the key thing that I find creationists don't do. They don't actually go to the source. They go to second and third party redactors rather than go to the primary. I'm not a biologist, so it's hard for me to remember this stuff.
What Isaiah is saying too is that it's specific to birds. Therefore, it's evidence that the T-Rex and the birds share a common ancestor.
Right.
I mean, obviously, T-Rex didn't evolve into birds. They had a common ancestor that split about 100 million years before that. But it is evidence that dinosaurs and birds are closely related. And like you said, the young Earth creationists ignore that. So,
can I real quick? I got a special guest in the audience that doesn't come around very often, and I don't know if he already left yet. I hope not. But can I put a shout out to Dr. Jones out there, NGC Studios? My bud, man. He has a great channel over there in NGC Studios. He has a show called The Place. He's been doing stuff on these topics for longer than I've ever been around, probably the longest since I've been born, back in the early YouTube days, and just brilliant stuff. He has some of the best conversations. Go check out his channel. I've been on his channel numerous times. Ozzy's been on the channel. Stephen Hoyt's been on his channel. Aaron's been on his channel. He has a lot of good dialogue. So a big shout out to Dr. Jones out there, if he's still out there. Oh, yeah, it's good. I'm a huge fan. I love his channel because he has conversations. He has dialogue, which is what I've been trying to do for ages, and yet I get flack for it because people try to stifle who I talk to and who I don't talk to, and I find that to be just the antithesis of having a good dialogue and learning about things. Because I got to tell you, I've had discussions that I didn't think were very productive, find out later on that they were. I just get messages all the time. I got one today saying, "Hey, Steve, I was a younger creationist till I met you and Arn." People do watch these things. Yeah, so people, I get those things frequently anymore. Bill's got them. And Isaiah back in the day, people were coming to him and saying, "Hey, you really know how to debunk this stuff." We make these things for a reason. They're not just for ourselves. Granted, we do live off YouTube, or at least I do. But I also do it because I want people to change the position if their position is wrong. Now, I want that caveat, that be said. That caveat is that I'm not looking for people to have an agenda or an ideology. I'm looking for people to change the position if they're wrong.
Yeah.
And all we do is discuss things to see who's right and who's wrong, or if there is any right or wrong. Sometimes they may not be, right? So that's why I enjoy talking to you, because you seem like you're open-minded.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you're doing, and you do have a great personality, and you're very kind and very welcoming. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate it, man. I put something on my Facebook today that I think it was probably one you saw, because the guy that thanked me, but I said something along the lines of, after wading so much shit, I become a better swimmer. You get a lot of negative comments, you get a lot of things thrown at you, but if you can survive that, man, do you become a lot stronger person.
I bet. That's why I like Joe Rogan's podcast for the same reason. It's just
I like Joe. I've never met him, but one of these days maybe.
Yeah. So Isaiah, are you an old Earth creationist, or are you an atheist or an agnostic?
No, I'm an atheist.
Okay, and Bill, I assume you're an atheist also.
Yeah, I've always been an atheist. I mean, I'm one of those people that I don't know that at any point in my life I could ever say I ever believed in any gods. And it's not that I didn't look at it. I mean, I struggled with it a lot throughout my teens and stuff, just because I had one parent more than the other that was religious, but it was never like a requirement at our house. I mean, it was always and they weren't extremely or super religious or anything, but I've just kind of always been an atheist. I just didn't get involved in this stuff until more recently, in the last 20 years, but I mean, I'm new to YouTube, but I was doing a lot on other things, a lot of discussion forums and things like that before that. So, but yeah.
Gotcha.
How about you? Have you always been a young Earth creationist, or I mean, is it something where you found Christianity and you became a creationist, or I didn't? If you discussed it earlier, I missed that.
No, I didn't. That's a good question. No, I was raised in a Christian home that was took Genesis and Revelation really literally. One of those families that believed in a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, because it kind of goes together for a lot of people, taking Genesis and Revelation literally. Went to a Christian school where I heard Ken Ham and accepted Christ. Like, I actually made Christianity my own when I was 17, and then that's when I actually read the Bible for myself, and that was just amazing, because I'd always been in church, but I actually read it for myself, and I was really hooked after that. And I guess you could say I experienced Jesus, which I know is no evidence that I could force somebody else to believe in Christianity, but experienced Jesus, read his word. I've actually got another YouTube channel where I'm teaching through the entire Bible. I think I'm about 7% through, and so I hope to finish that in like 20 years. Have a website. Can go to any.
Well, let me ask you this then. We have I'm the agnostic in the room. They're the atheists, but we're all non-believers. So let me ask you from a non-believer standpoint. I have a friend. His name's Dr. Hugh Ross. I'm sure you know him, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great guy. One of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. I mean, say what you want about his theology. Do I agree with a lot of stuff that he says? No, I don't. But, I mean, he writes well. His Probable Planet book was a really, really good book. But he's really genuine, all right? He believes what he believes, right? And that's the kind of conversation I want to have. Now, he is convinced, because of science, because he has a PhD in astrophysics, that the Earth and the universe is very, very old. But he's also a Christian. So here, as us, the non-believers, we're looking at two Christians, right? But you're saying the Earth is young. He's saying the Earth is old. Do you not think that if we're going to be looking something along those lines, that falls outside the realm of Scripture? That falls outside the book of Revelations or book of Scripture? I should say not Revelations, book of Scripture, but falls into the book of nature? That we all should be able to look at the universe and say, this is the age. Now, if God made it that way, that's another thing, right? That's a different question altogether. But us three non-believers, we're now seeing two Christians that have very diametrically different positions when it comes to the age of the Earth, but they're both claiming God did it this way. How are we supposed to make that distinction between the two? Yeah,
so, I mean, for me, it's just taking the Bible at face value, which I think is very important, because, here's my fear, and I believe it's the fear of any young Earth creationist, is if you start bending the verses about creation and the age of the universe and Earth, then you're bending the word. Then you could bend anything else. You know what I mean? So you're you're making this book not a true source of knowledge. The big thing for me is that, and I think I said this before on the other interviews, Jesus in Mark 10:6, I believe it is, he says that Adam and Eve were at the beginning of creation. And so, that model, Homo sapiens at the beginning of creation doesn't fit with an old universe and a common ancestry. And so for me, it's really about just trusting God's word. Am I going to trust it or not? And then, of course, we believe God, if you take it literally, then, God made Adam with age. He made the trees with age and all the animals at first with age. Even when he turned water into wine, which is way later, and when Jesus came to earth, you look at that wine and he just turned water into wine. Well, that's aged grape juice. And so again, you've got something that, because it is a special creator, it has age built into it.
Well, there's two problems I have with that. One, that's called the Omphalos hypothesis, or the last Thursdayism, if you've ever heard of that. But it's unfalsifiable. It's just basically saying the Earth could have been created yesterday or 5 minutes ago. We could have never known. So if you look up the Omphalos hypothesis, that's where it came from. But that's not the bigger issue I have. The bigger issue I have is that if that was the case, why did it take almost 2,000 years for them to determine young Earth creationism? Because young Earth creationism has not been around very long. It's a very newer phenomenon in modern history. It wasn't until Usher even started it with his chronology, which, by the way, he did incorrectly. If you ask any genealogist, the way he did the genealogy was completely wrong, because he was figuring a linear, son begat, and there's whole absolute gaps in the record in the Bible. But he came up with that. He actually determined the Earth to be made on, I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I'm going to paraphrase, at like 9:30 or 9:30.
I heard
9:30 on
yeah.
Thursday, after in the morning. Now this is something that he came up with, right? And I don't remember. I think it was Tuesday. Was it 9:30 Tuesday? Somebody could look it up. It's irrelevant, nuanced stuff. But Ellen G. White ran with that from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right? So she actually was the one that promoted younger creationism. Other churches were only doing that. So if this was the word of God, and for thousands of years nobody knew that until Usher comes along, and Ellen G. Wright from the Seventh-day Adventists, who, by the way, would be heretical to most churches now, why would you think that's the word of God when that's a relatively new phenomenon? I mean, in fact, the way it actually was promoted by Ham and Hovind, and I think you recognize by now that Hovind is probably a con man. I think you would agree with that?
Well, I haven't listened to him enough to decide. And I don't think I've even listened to a Hovind debate with anyone.
He's running a cult.
Back to your
Really?
question.
You haven't listened to Hovind debate? Bill Ludlow debated him. Isaiah and I have talked together. We had a phone call.
Well, I think I heard he was a King James only guy, and that kind of turns me off of people.
Yeah, he's a King James only literist.
If they're a King James only, I kind of shut that off.
But
back to your main question, I would
use. What Bible do you use?
I think the New American Standard is one of the most literal, word for word, because you got thought for thought, word for word, and even BibleHub.com is great because you can look up the Greek and Hebrew, and it's just easier, or you can get a better picture of what it was in the original language. But back to your question, I don't think it is new, and I think I should study it. I mean, I think you'd find Jewish writings where they took the Torah, or the Pentateuch, and they would take it literally. And so if you read Genesis 1 through 11 and you lived thousands of years ago, I think you would take it as a young Earth.
But they didn't. They didn't think that back then.
What's your evidence that they did that?
Because I've talked to biblical and little scholars, and they're like, this is not the model that they had back then. That might have been isolated pockets, but that was something when they were thinking about a young Earth, they were probably thinking along the lines of hundreds of thousands of years. I don't think in any biblical days somebody said, "Hey, this was made like 1,000 years ago, couple hundred years ago."
If I can add, there wasn't a young Earth, old Earth controversy back then because there was no old Earth either, really, though. Like Steve just said, I mean, people thought in terms of the Earth being maybe thousands and thousands of years old, but they didn't conceive of millions or billions of years, too. One of the real interesting things that I've just recently been reading about was what they thought of fossils and stuff, and I just assumed that the church all thought fossils had to do with Noah's flood and stuff like that. But there's a book called The Seashell on the Mountaintop, and it talks about Nicholas Steno, and his life, and he's one of the founders of geology, but back then, people in the 1500s, 1600s stuff, they still read a lot of Aristotle and things like that. And Aristotle was all about spontaneous generation.
Yeah.
Fossils in the mountains and seashells in mountains, they sprung there like minerals did. They formed the same type of way as minerals and weren't related to the seashells in the ocean, believe it or not. I mean, they didn't connect it. They connected and saw they were similar, but they didn't say that necessarily meant that ocean creatures once lived there.
Right.
It was really interesting. So, and the scientific aspect, creation scientific aspect of creationism really didn't start until the 60s with, Genesis Flood and books like that, and the formation of the Institute for Creation Research with Morris and that. So he was like a predecessor to Ken Ham, but So anyway, I was just surprised to learn. I just figured, they always thought the Earth was young, but they didn't really care about it all that much, just because nobody was out there saying the Earth is billions of years old.
Yeah, that's what I figured, that Darwin really made it popular. He wasn't the first one to say it. But
Darwin realized that it was going to take long ages for things to evolve. But, geology was new back then, too. So right at the time and it was really just around that time that people were starting to talk in the terms of millions of years. I've got Dana's textbook on geology from the 1890s, and reading through that, I mean, they had no concept that the Earth was over 4 billion years old, even is that recent.
Right, but they also didn't have the scientific knowledge we had either.
Right, exactly. Right. It wasn't until radiometric dating that we really got any kind of idea. Every time they estimated, it kept getting older and older and older.
Yeah, and that's one thing that makes science great. Now, people will actually say, well, science changed it. Well, yeah, but also science made it more precise. I mean, science said, look, we know it has to be at least this. And they had a range, right? And then they say, oh, we have more measurements. We have better instrumentation. We have better procedures, better experiments. And they make that range smaller and smaller and smaller. That's what good science is supposed to do. When you find an outlier and say, hey, this is way off here, something's probably wrong with the methodology you're using rather than the entire realm of science. But if you could overturn science, that would be, you'd be famous, right? If you could show something that we held as a long-standing model that no longer describes reality, that's what a scientist would love to do. They would become instantly famous if they overturned a scientific theory. Doesn't mean the scientific theory wasn't right the entire time, but it just means that it didn't properly describe our observations, because we found new observations that it cannot no longer work for. Like Newtonian physics isn't wrong. It just didn't work when we realized that when you go near the speed of light, strange things happen, right? Or if you're in gravitational wells, strange things happen. Relativity had to take over from there. So that makes sense. So that's what science does, and science has been saying in every single branch, the Earth is around 4.5 billion years, give or take. It's plus or minus a few hundred million years.
Well, one thing you notice one thing you notice is that the Earth just kept getting older. The minimum established age for the Earth kept getting older based on all these reasons, different reasons. But it wasn't jumping around like, they didn't start saying it was 20 billion and then 4 billion and then 18 billion. I mean, it just kept getting older until we finally reached that established age based on actual scientific dating methods that weren't only available the last 60 or 70 years. So,
yeah. And I hope I'm not a disappointment to the conversation by expressing that I believe the creation of the universe and of the Earth is a miracle. So I would look at it the same way, a scientist would look at Mary when she's pregnant with Jesus, and she would say, well, clearly this lady had relations with a man, and then, of course, believing it's a miracle, And
I'm not faulting you for that. What I'm faulting you is that if creation is as positive as science, which it is, that's why they call it creation science, then science should be able to make the determination of the age of the Earth based upon scientific measurements and experiments. And I got to tell you, I'm not fronting here. I've gone through Hovind's book, his notebook, 9th edition notebook called The Arrival of the Fittest, and debunked everything in there when it came to science. I mean, literally have shown why every one of his claims is fundamentally wrong. So they don't match up with science. So all these creationists that are saying, well, this is science, this is creation science, there's not a single, and I'm telling you, I'm not fronting here, there's not a single shred of any discipline of science, any branch, that indicates a young Earth. Not one. Not even remotely so. And I actually brought this to the attention of Dr. Humphreys, who's a very famous physicist in Answers in Genesis, and he writes for ICR. And we were talking about the heat problem and accelerated decay. And I had asked him, well, what is your evidence for accelerated decay? Because you have to explain a large amount of heat we have to account for between 6,000 years of decay and almost 5 billion years of decay, right? 4.5 billion years of decay. That's a lot of energy difference, right? It has to be accounted for. And his answer was this: accelerated decay has to exist because there's no other possibility, because the Earth is young. That's begging the question, right? That's not an answer from a scientist I would expect. Because there is no answer to that question. Accelerated decay doesn't exist. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. There's small things that can affect accelerated decay, but we're talking very small levels called K capture or electron capture, and some other things with an isotope called beryllium-7 and 8. But other than that, no evidence whatsoever. And so why is it that he is saying that it exists because it must exist, rather than a scientist that says, you know what? Yeah, there's no evidence for this. Therefore, I cannot posit it as being the explanation.
Well, what I'm finding is that you've got a lot of people saying evidence when it's faith on our side, on the Christian side. And I think you guys appreciate it when someone says, I don't have concrete evidence for Jesus. I've got these reasons why I believe, or I don't have concrete evidence for a young universe. But it's because that's, to me, is really faith-based. My young Earth creationism is faith-based. And I'd love to talk to you about the Earth's magnetic field, which I know you've dealt with, and the decay rate.
That's also Humphrey's work, by the way.
Okay, and then apparently some planets are giving off twice as much heat as they're taking in from the sun.
That was found to be incorrect for Jupiter and Venus.
Okay, and so these are things clearly I need to research before I tell it to people, to try to convince them to be younger creationists. I need to really research it and make sure, I've got something.
Well, let me ask Isaiah, because he's been awfully quiet. Isaiah, what claim have you seen that in creationism that you thought was something that the creationists put out that you completely know is wrong, and you can show that's wrong? My favorite one was the human chromosome number 2 fusion. I mean, Tompkins' work was just, I think he had to know he was deliberately lying to people, because you can go look at the evidence and see that he was saying there's a transcription on the canonical region, that there was a DDX11L2 gene that produced these transcripts that there's no evidence of any transcripts for it. It's spurious. And so his entire narrative was, I think, BS. And I think he had to know that. So what do you have that you think that some creationists put out that you were like, yeah, you know what, they have to know that they're wrong on it?
As of recently on Facebook, I've been I go back and forth from genetics and paleontology, is what I'm focusing on. But recently, I've been focusing on birds and dinosaurs recently, and I've noticed a lot of them quoting the work of Alan Fiducia, the ornithologist.
Yeah, but he's the only one of the bandits left, isn't he?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that I'm being sent is like 10, 20 years out of date, and you have to know this stuff is incorrect, because I can see, 1 year out of date, 2 years out of date, but a whole decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, it's...
Well, but Alan Fiducia is he's not a creationist, though, and I think he's just refusing to catch up with the times. I mean, the bandits are birds and not dinosaur people. Very few, if any, anymore. I think he's just, I think, stubborn. I mean, but Bill could probably touch on that a little bit, couldn't you, Bill?
I'm not real big on that, actually. No, I mean, I'm not super familiar with him, but I know, like you said, he's like the last holdout. But I mean, he's not on the forefront of the discoveries or any of it, or he's not publishing new stuff about it. I mean,
yeah, I don't think he's even said much about birds and dinosaurs recently. I think even he's really involved. He might just says, you know what, I'm. But again, look at what happened when you had things like jumping genes. Look what happened when we had Margolis with endosymbiosis and mitochondrial absorption and eukaryotes and all this stuff. That stuff took a long time to get to be prevalent in the scientific arena, right?
Yeah, so, if you think about one thing that agitates me, is how creationists so hop on a scientist with an anomalous, theory, like what's his name, Fred Hoyle.
What about
You know Fred Hoyle, right?
Yeah, Fred Hoyle was a mathematician.
Yeah, but he would
Who had a
posit
lot of post-hoc
really strange ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and creationists would hop on it and just run with it, like almost as if like. I had one creationist quote Fiducia and tell me there's many scientists who share this opinion, but you quoted one, and that's you. They're exaggerating their impact, is what I'm trying to get at.
To answer Steve's question about what do you think that they just made up or there's no evidence for or whatever, one of my biggest examples or best examples has to be Kent Hovind and the magnetic ice. I mean, that one just blows me away every time he says it.
Refresh my memory on that one.
He talks about Comet around the time of the flood. That's what caused the ice age was magnetic ice being attracted to the poles, and it's a whole bizarre theory.
But he also has his like canopy theory, but he only says, well, this is my particular theory, but he also promotes hydroplate theory, which was
it's a modified hydroplate theory. Yeah.
Okay.
But the comet with that, and he just he sets it up by saying, well, everybody knows that super cold ice is magnetic. Well, no, there's no evidence of that at all.
That's not right.
All of Kent Hovind stuff is stolen from Walt Brown.
Yeah, he's a Walt Brown fanatic, I think. But anyway, Jackson Wheat, welcome.
Oh, thanks. Hey. Sorry, my flight was later than I had hoped.
Where were you flying in from?
North Carolina, ultimately.
Oh, okay. So you were trying to get my money then. I
was actually, I think I was only like an hour or two from where Kyle is.
Jackson Wheat's my enforcer.
I'm too weak. I'm too jelly to be an enforcer. Sorry.
You can just go and overload people with knowledge. There you go.
I could try, I guess.
So, Jackson, I don't remember. Were you on with Jeremy before? I don't recall.
I don't believe so. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You're just getting to meet all the big timers, man. Jackson's big news, too. He's a...
Man, thanks.
Yeah.
You're meeting the nice guys, though.
Yeah. By the way, we're the nice ones in the
We're the nice guys.
Right? Wait till you actually meet Skylar Fiction. He'll kill you. No, I like Skylar.
I'll be back in about 5 minutes, guys. I got something I got to take care of, so I'll be right back.
All right. So what else you got for us, Jeremy?
So he is the creationist?
Jeremy is the creationist in the room, yes. He is
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he is, I don't know, convinced because of the Bible, because of faith, that the earth is young, which is the same thing that Hugh Ross could say, well, I'm convinced because of faith that the earth is old, but he doesn't. He's like, I'm convinced the earth is old because of science. We can actually demonstrate through science that the earth is old, radiological considerations especially. By dating, we know that the age of the earth is around 4.5 billion years. That's not even an ontological question. So, we're trying to explain to Jeremy, if your religion's saying that reality as we understand is completely wrong, that's not a miracle. That is your religion, that is your church giving you misinformation. Why don't you find a church that comports with reality, at least in some regard, to say that like an old earth religion or something?
I mean, even the religion itself, I mean, I think a lot of people, like as you alluded to, would interpret the very same scriptures as not saying a young earth, like Hugh Ross or Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, or many other Christians would interpret that differently. And so I don't even think it's really a biblical matter at that point.
Well, and like I told Steve, one of the big things that really convinces me is that, Jesus, I mean, we're talking about God in the flesh and Mark 10:6 saying that Adam and Eve were at the beginning of creation. So that doesn't mesh with an old universe where humans...
Not necessarily. Hugh Ross wrote a book called, Who Was Adam? And I think he wrote another book called Revisiting Genesis or something like that. But he was able to put it in his ontology.
Well, I'll have to look that up. But the whole idea is, man, you would have to, I believe you'd have to throw out the whole religion. You've got a book you can no longer trust. And like I said before, there's plenty of instances, I believe, where things were made with age. So that's how we...
Well, I don't think you'd have to... Well, really, I disagree with both of those premises. I don't think you have to throw out... I mean, like we were saying, Hugh Ross, Michael Jones...
Sygard, he's out there right now. Yeah.
There are loads of people, and I'm an atheist. There are loads of people who have no problem looking at Genesis as allegorical, Christians looking at it as allegorical, and and stuff like that. So they have no problem with the Earth being old and those sorts of things. It's not like it either has to be all fiction or it's all true. There's literature in the Bible. There's some historical narratives. It's kind of all meshed together. The Bible is sort of like an anthology of different sort of stories, different types of stories. And this is
totally agree.
Yeah, and so you don't have to take it all literally or just all as fiction. That's what I would say.
Yeah, but when you've got the words of Jesus, then it's just a slippery slope that I'm concerned about. Then you can really twist anything and call it allegory. And if you've read Genesis 1 through 11, then it's just to look at it naturally. You would take it. I understand parables are different; those are not necessarily true stories, but.
Well, you got to admit, people have been doing that for thousands of years. I mean, the way some people describe religion, I don't remember who said it, but there's basically you're like a blind man in the dark looking around for a black cat. Everybody's just taking what they want and they pick and choose, and I don't see any semblance of coherence between a lot of different religions, except for very, very myopic basics. There's a God, okay, but other than that, there is no set objective standards by which we can go. This is the way it actually is. These are all faith-based things, which I get, and again, I'm not condemning people for that, but you can't discount things that we do know that are not faith-based, that are objective. Math is objective, right? 1 + 1 = 2 is an objective fact.
Allegedly.
But if your Bible, if the Bible said, 1 + 1 = 3, then that has to be wrong. I mean, the Bible does not take precedence, and the Bible obviously does have things it doesn't get quite correct, but you can't use your interpretation of the Bible to supersede things that we know to be the case. That's not faith. That's just you being wrong.
No, I think it is faith. When the Bible says one thing, and what you see is different, then that's faith, because you're going on what you heard and not what you can see. That's walking by faith, not by sight. You get what I'm saying? Like, I know there's light, there's stars out there, billions of light years away, but I'm choosing to believe what I believe the Bible is conveying, which is a young universe. And so then I say, well, God must have extended that light when he created it so Adam and Eve could see it the first night.
So are you just like completely fine with Muslims and Hindus saying the exact same things of their religion?
Well, I'm not controlling. People can say and do what they want.
I mean, if a Muslim person says, just have faith that, the Quran is correct, do you just say, okay?
Well, I don't say it's true. No, I don't have that same faith.
Okay, so what are you basing your not believing him on then?
Pretty much you're asking why I believe the Bible, why I think it's the Word of God.
Yeah, what's your metric by determining that's the standard that you want to use?
Right.
Yeah. Man, experiencing him, reading the Bible, and I told you this is all subjective stuff that
sure we get that.
Discount. Like, I talk about on my channel. I believe science points to a creator, but to believe that Jesus, specific creator, takes faith. Well, it used to be DNA. I thought, man, DNA is functional information. It's a recipe. Recipes don't write themselves. And when I started looking into protein synthesis, I'm like, man, I don't believe non-life could become life unguided.
Okay, well, even granting, let's just grant that God snapped his invisible fingers and the first cell originated. You're still looking at 4 billion years of the evolutionary history of life on Earth.
Yeah, then I believe in the Bible, which is he made different kinds of animals fully formed and Adam and Eve fully formed.
But
so I'm not I'm a young Earth creationist, so I don't believe God used macroevolution.
So I think we could probably demonstrate to your satisfaction that macroevolution does indeed exist, but you wouldn't be evaluating that by your faith. You'd be evaluating that based on the evidence we present and the evidence that you're aware of. Correct?
No, that's another thing that falls under faith.
So you reject by faith alone that macroevolution?
Yeah, because macroevolution occurs, but you're now saying that by faith you're going to deny that, even though it's established a macroevolution. We can actually show you in real time it can happen in a single generation. it's not up for deliberation whether macroevolution occurs or not. Matter of fact, Wayne Fillmore left Young Earth Creationism after he found out there is macroevolution. He felt he was lied to on that, and he looked into everything else and realized he was lied to about everything in creationism, and he completely just left it. He just disbanded from it.
Yeah,
So,
I'd say show me, but my first thought is that the genetic code, that mutations in the genetic code would way more often than not degrade the code.
That's false.
yeah,
That's false.
That's not the case.
Do you read genetic technical literature?
No.
So what are you basing that claim on?
Just kind of common sense about.
But the genetics science isn't common sense.
Well, part of it functions that way.
It doesn't. Electrons.
Quantum mechanics is not common sense. Trust me.
Which I do want to talk about. If you guys believe, I would like to talk about quantum mechanics in a little bit, and if you believe that we are only, 3 spatial dimensions is all that there are, but.
I necessarily don't agree with. I mean, I don't know. There could be up to 10 spatial dimensions, or 9 spatial, 1 temporal dimension, 10 total. Somebody wanted me to expand upon the macroevolution. Yeah, you can look up different species of wheatgrass because of polyploidy and whole genome duplication. It can actually speciate in a single generation, which is actually a form of macroevolution. There's other types.
Tell me that again. I'm gonna write it down.
Macroevolution. You can look under wheatgrass. It's called polyploidy, which is a duplication of the chromosomes. Whole genome duplication. The whole genome becomes duplicated. That's a mutation of the genome, and because of that, it has speciated in a single generation, where the ancestral populations can no longer mate with the modern ones, or vice versa. This also happens with what's called sympatric speciation, where you have a different diploid number, and because through mutations and duplications, the speciation event occurs where you no longer have, it's usually microbes, but you have the inability to mate with other members of ancestral populations. That is what speciation is. I mean, there's 28 factors or so of it, but that is definitely speciation. That's one factor that makes something a species. You can't mate with your ancestors.
And that added information that showed that it could create complex mechanisms that weren't there before.
It doesn't have to be complex.
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to be complex. I mean, if you just duplicate, all your chromosomes, like he mentioned wheatgrass. There's in plants this happens like mad. But there's also it occurs sometimes in animals like
starfish. I think it happened to, and I think maybe date palm, maybe. If I remember correctly, I think starfish has happened too.
Well, there was the example of the marbled crawfish, which was back in the 90s. This guy released a marbled crawfish into the wild, which had it became triploid, if I remember correctly, and so now it's invasive. It's basically taking over where the native crawfish were, and it's very invasive now. And so that's another example of a speciation event in one generation.
Yeah, so because my issue with macroevolution is that you've got starting out with something very similar something very similar to a prokaryotic cell, right? The first cells or the first forms of life were very similar to a prokaryotic cell, and then what you've got are these mutations that would eventually, over billions of years, lead to complex mechanisms like what we see in complex organisms, right? So that's what I'm wanting to see.
That happens, but that's not really macroevolution. That's biochemistry.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Then my issue is with the common ancestry, that mutations could develop complex mechanisms in organisms that were functional.
Such as, I mean, in some cases we have worked out like literally the step by step pathways to some like in the example of the notothenoid icefish. There are no young Earth creationists who have tackled the notothenoid icefish problem. There is one intelligent designer who attempted to do it and miserably failed, which is Casey Luskin. But notothenoid icefish, they basically took a gene, a pancreatic enzyme, or a gene for pancreatic enzyme, and they mutated it over and over and over and over, and each duplicated gene accrued mutations, until eventually it came to specify a new function. This is called neofunctionalization. It went from being a pancreatic enzyme gene to an antifreeze gene. It's using the same amino acid repeats to build the enzymes, which is threonine, alanine, alanine, but it's doing a different function now than it was in its ancestors. And they've worked this out step by step. It's beautiful
Yeah, I'd
stuff.
like to research that more, because a lot of times
Sounds like
people gloss
proteomics,
over.
though.
A lot
Yes.
of times people gloss over things that are very important, like the RNA world hypothesis, where they had to add an enzyme to get that backbone to form. And then when you realize an enzyme is made up of an average of 200 amino acids and very
wait, not necessarily. You got to remember.
No.
You got to remember.
Yeah.
Proteins can have enzymatic function, but not all enzymes are proteins.
True.
right.
So you
Right.
can have
Yeah, I
enzymes that are not based on proteins.
Like ribozymes.
Ribozymes are based on RNA enzymatic functions.
Yeah. And
Oh,
the base
gotcha. So
of
you're
the
saying it was not necessarily an enzyme that was just made up of amino acids?
Right. Yeah. Well, protein or peptide chain. Yeah. I mean, the thing that solves the whole DNA chicken and egg problem, right? Because there's obviously are proteins in ribosomes. Right. There's ribozymes.
Well, I'm just talking about. I'm just saying, in the lab, they had to add an enzyme to get the RNA to have a backbone, and I'm saying that to the average person, you're like,
RNA
oh, no
has a
big
backbone.
deal.
It has it has a phosphate backbone.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I mean,
added
you
something?
can-
It was from State. Are you familiar with Stated Clearly? His
Yes,
YouTube channel.
I've debated him
Okay.
before. On
So
DNA as a
look,
code.
watch his video. I'm sorry.
I debated him before
Oh,
on if DNA is a code. Yeah, he's a nice guy. No, John's a nice guy.
yeah. Well, on his video on RNA world hypothesis, he just mentions that in the lab they had to add an enzyme to get the backbone to form, for it to create I believe a double helix to get the RNA.
Do you
to
know what they mean by that? You mean like a
RNA
pairing backbone? Because there's a sodium phosphate backbone for RNA and DNA.
They had to add an enzyme to make it form, is what the video said.
I'm not sure what that means.
So really, the detail I'm saying is that enzymes are complicated, and we can't gloss over that in the lab. And so when I look up about this fish, I'm just going to be very, cautious and look, and every little thing they say they had to do, I'm going to say, well, how easily is that done in nature?
I mean,
Because
well,
ahead.
well, for one thing, we're looking at a process that it probably wasn't, simple or easy. It probably took many steps to go from. I mean, very likely took many steps and hypercycles and all of this before you got to the first, true cells. One book that's really good on that subject is The Vital Question, written by a biochemist named Nick Lane.
Mhm.
And he talks a lot about the metabolism first hypothesis, which is kind of prevailing now as opposed to the RNA first. And so, so because you have the first cells or the first kind of protocells are occurring by alkaline vents, which are occurring deep in the ocean, and they have the materials in them, like iron sulfides, which are occurring in the sides, which are able to catalyze certain reactions that are necessary for building organic molecules that wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And so, there's there's loads and loads of stuff going on there. And so, I'm not entirely sure what you mean when you say there was an enzyme there.
Yeah. By the way, I meant sugar phosphate background. The Scotch is kicking in.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know it's
Well,
a
the
rival. I know.
The whole
Sure.
point of that was me saying that the average person, you say, well, we had to add an enzyme to make this form. They're like, no big deal. But if you understand how complex an enzyme is.
Let me ask you this: what does an enzyme do? Do you know? What's the purpose of an enzyme?
Well, I'm not sure how it was used. It's a catalyst, right?
But what does the catalyst do? How does the catalyst work?
I don't know.
I'm not trying to put you on
It
the spot,
lowers
but
the
it
activation
lowers
energy
the activation
of a-
energy. Exactly.
of a reaction. And like I said, there are minerals like that exist in the very places we think that origin of lifestyle was going on, which catalyze reactions like iron sulfides.
One sec,
And-
Jackson. 'Cause I think this is critical. Jeremy, this is why I think a lot of it seems wondrous to you. Because, no offense, I just don't think you've had the coursework, right? Because an enzyme is a very basic thing that people learn about catalyzations and what's called lowering activation energy based upon what you will learn to be called Gibbs free energy levels. But these concepts, you have to have an understanding of them before you start pontificating like you do on your videos, because they're not wondrous. I mean, they're amazing if you're into science. I think that's cool stuff. Don't get me wrong.
mean, yeah,
In that
they're
case,
pretty
they're wondrous how a catalyst actually works, because a catalyst doesn't actually utilize an actual reactant to where it makes it go away. It actually it doesn't like you put what happens when you put like chlorine and sodium together, right, and have a reaction, right? Sodium chloride. it combines them together. It utilizes both parts. But a catalyst doesn't use up a material. It acts as a catalyst just by lowering that activation energy, by making it easier to have more reactions occur in less time. That's essentially what an enzyme does. So these concepts, you really should, instead of promoting creationism, go learn about the chemistry of it. Go learn about the science, because then you have an understanding of it and go, okay, this is at least what an enzyme does. That way, you're not mystified by, well, why do I need an enzyme for this? Well, because you will need more reactions occur in a quicker time. Because if not, it would take a very long time for certain reactions to occur. But an enzyme speeds that up.
Yeah, it sounded like he said it was necessary to get it to connect in the video. Which I did. I linked it when I talked about RNA. I did provide a link to his video.
I mean, I'm curious to see the video. I'll have to go look at it. But I think that maybe something was misunderstood.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well.
I think something was misunderstood there. But
you know what he might be talking about? He might be talking about RNA, single-strand RNA forming double-strand RNA, which is a precursor to DNA double-strand.
That would have occurred much later than the.
Clearly, yeah. But I think that's probably what he was referring to, something along those lines. Because RNA could self-replicate, but it's very fragile. In DNA, you have a hydrophilic region in the middle, right? And that region prevents water from degrading the DNA, right? Because water. By the way, we had a big thing on this years ago whether DNA degrades in water or not.
Oh Lord,
it dissolves in water, but it does not degrade.
We're not bringing this up again.
Oh yes, we are. I love this topic because we haven't talked about it in years. Shut up. So we had a guy in the community who was a younger creationist. Well, no, he wasn't a young creationist. He was an ID proponent. But he had kind of weird beliefs. But he was trying to tell biochemists that DNA degraded in water because he didn't understand what that meant by that. DNA dissolves in water because it's protein. Because it's proteination. We have a little proton that's on that sugar phosphate backbone that pop off. That's why they call it an acid. An acid will change the pH level of the solution it's in. So that proteination happens and you have DNA dissolving. No big deal. But he thought that meant that it degraded. Big difference. And so RNA doesn't have that hydrophilic region in the middle to help minimize things like that. So it will I think degrade a lot easier than DNA will. That was the problem with RNA hypothesis, is that RNA is a very fragile structure. And again, we have a biochemist in the live chat, Psychard, and I hope to God that he's not going, Steve, shut the hell up. His scotch is like affecting your brain here. I'm going back a few years in my.
Yeah, that's true. Even still, the whole abiogenesis route is interesting and it's fascinating research and all that, but it's not going to get you to macroevolution. So, I mean, like, what specifically about? So I kind of want to take left turn. Well, left turn. Sorry.
Swipe left.
So, in terms of what specifically is your issue with macroevolution? Like, if you've said it before, could you reiterate?
Yeah. So when you look at a prokaryotic cell, then imagining that over time becoming these way more complex organisms with way more complex mechanisms.
Okay, so that's like a whole bunch of different questions in one. When you say it's becoming all these, well, I mean, a prokaryotic cell didn't become didn't become a fungi or anything like that. These were eukaryotes, which became other eukaryotes. There was, an archaean at one point which engulfed alpha proteobacterium, and that became like the first eukaryotic cell.
Right, so that's a prokaryotic cell.
Right, so you had,
right.
Right, yeah, you had this bond between two prokaryotes. And what's interesting is in recent years we found, the microbiologists have found this group of bacterium called the Asgard superphylum. Have you heard of that?
No.
So there's this whole clade of archaeans, which, by the way, are you familiar with the three domains? You have bacteria, and then you have archaeans, and they're more closely related to eukaryotes.
No, I was more familiar with the other two.
It's called three-domain model.
Yeah. Okay. So it was developed by was Wose and a few others in Lake in the 80s. At any rate, so
it's a little antiquated though, but whatever, because they're hard.
Right. Well, right, and that's because of groups like the Asgard superphylum. It turns out that not all archaeans fit neatly within the archaea domain. It turns out some of them are more closely related to eukaryotes due to certain genes that they have than they are to the core archaeans, which are called Eukaryotic. And so the bridge between prokaryote and eukaryote is becoming ever smaller as we discover these guys and what they're doing, what their genes are like, and we figure more out, or we figure more about the alpha proteobacterium and all this. And so that divide is just becoming ever smaller, and it even has practical application. The endosymbiotic theory has application in medicine, for instance, which is why you have antibacterial medicine will affect your mitochondria, but not the rest of the cell, and vice versa.
It's different. Yeah, it's almost like a different organism there. But I mean, there's also the Protista has the same thing with symbiotic relationships.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a type of eukaryote. So I mean, yeah, the whole, when you get down to that part of the tree, Jeremy, you start getting issues because we are learning more about what happened, because it's the farther back we go, the less information we have on it available to us. But we realizing there was something called horizontal gene transfer that existed, that there was a lot of cross genetics going on at the time. It's more when people say, well, the genetic tree is no longer valid. No, that's not true. What they mean to say is that when you get closer to the base, it becomes more of a bush, which is fine. Science grows, it learns. So the 3 domain model is pretty antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
But when creationists see that, they go, "Oh, look at that! They're lying to people. That's wrong." Well, no, it's just a simplification. Exactly.
Yeah, because if you were to show, I mean, there are, I think actually in the vital question, it's like, if you were to look at what it actually looks like, it's arrows going back and forth among all 3 of them, just over and over and over.
There's a lot of cross.
The HGT going on.
Yeah, HGT.
Yeah.
So
yeah. My issue is just seeing a prokaryotic cell or eukaryotic cell becoming an organism with organs. That's just that's amazing.
I mean, that's multiple transitions.
Yeah,
that's
right. I know. Yeah, I know. And I'm not saying it's instant, but even over a long period of time.
But that's an argument for incredulity. That's just because
I'm sorry.
That's an argument from incredulity.
So I mean, if I were to ask you, for instance, have you read technical literature about the origins of animals? Have you done that?
No, and I need to.
So I would encourage. I'm gonna plug myself here. Go check out my channel, because I do actually do all that.
He does. He's one of the foremost leaders in the community on whale penises.
I am.
Just so happy, man.
Yep. So him and Hovind have a lot in common. We talk about baculums all day long, man.
Yeah.
But check out his channel, because he has a lot of great content on there, and he explains all these things.
I do specifically go through the Tree of Life, and I did a whole series called oh crap, I forgot the name of it is. Anyways, the point of the series,
Christianity or Creationism. No, that wasn't yours. You liar. That's Aaron's.
Oh. It was something. It was something about common ancestry. At any rate, yeah, Common Ancestry was the name of the series. How about that?
Yeah. I've had brain farts all day today, so I'm on the same boat with you, man. I'm not thinking too clearly today.
Hey, I'm in a different time zone,
But you've got to admit that it does take some amount of faith that.
No, it doesn't.
Well, let me finish. That random genetic mutations can produce very complex and amazing mechanisms over time.
We know what happens. We've seen it happen with fungi. We've seen it happen with yeast.
Yeah, that's true.
There's complex. I need to research that.
So complexity is relative. Complexity is a throwaway term. Even a simple cell is so complex as hell. You try making a single cell out of, going to a laboratory, produce a cell.
Oh yeah, that's my whole page is on my whole YouTube channel is on abiogenesis.
But we can see how it came to be in parts. We can see the very first protocell. We can see the very first. Okay. And I really don't get too much into this because I'll lose the entire audience because they hate this stuff. But
yeah, we already talked about ID.
But there's something called ATP synthase, right? And the ATP synthase is the production of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which is basically a battery. It's basically energy molecules. And we can trace the steps by this through each iterations of the proteins needed to make that. All the way back, we can show that the very first cells, instead of having a proton motive force, which is a differential between number of ions, hydrogen ions on one side to the other, which are protons, that before that became the motive force to make things go roundy for the ATP synthase, there was something called sodium differentials. That was the sodium. We could actually see sodium produce this rotational effect in these protocells. This is one of the very first types of cells. we know these things are going to happen. And by the way, rotational energy is one of the least efficient for biological organisms. This is why things like endosymbiosis is really amazing, because biology doesn't want to have rotational stuff. It's very, very inefficient compared to other forms of emotion. So the fact that we have something like ATP synthase, yes, is amazing, but we can actually see the step-by-step iterations of the C ring and the F naught and the F1. We can see these iterations.
Yeah, there are intense technical papers on the biochemistry of ATP synthase. I also did a video on that, by the way, where I talk about they can pinpoint this. There's a mutation that caused this effect, another mutation that had this effect, and so it's been beautifully worked out. And there's loads of stuff like that, like for the things intelligent designers always like to talk about, like the eye, the flagellum. All these things have been, or a lot of these very complex structures have been worked out in astoundingly intricate detail. And same with like multicellularity. In some cases, I have a friend, Matthew Heron, who studies multicellularity in algae. He looks at this group called the Volvacenes, and it's this group that basically encompasses members who are unicellular, then they're bicellular, and they have just a few cells, and it goes all the way up to like thousands of cells. And so when you look at them, what's fascinating about this whole group is there's very little genetic difference between the unicellular ones and the ones that have thousands of cells. There's very little genetic difference between those, which stands in kind of contrast to the claims of creationist intelligent designers who say things like, oh, well, it has to have way more complex genetic machinery to manufacture this kind of this cell with thousands, or this organism with thousands of cells, but it really doesn't. It doesn't take.
Those different cells have different functions, or they
Yes.
all.
Actually, the Volvox. So you have like gonium on the one end, which can range from like, you have chlamydomonas on the one end, which has only one cell, the unicellular. Then you have Volvox on the end, which actually has differentiated cells. You have like the propagules, and you also have they form like daughter colonies, and then you have the ones that form like the body of the colonies. So yeah, it ranges the whole gambit from unicellular to multicellular with different functions. It's a fascinating little group.
Is there something or a channel where they could show how organs came about? Because organs
are specialized tissues. That's basically what they are. Organs are just really specialized tissues.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know.
You've just got, if you look through, I kind of talk a little bit about it in my Common Ancestry series. I talked about the eye in particular. I gave it its own video. It kind of depends. I mean, like the lungs evolved as pockets of the esophagus in fish around the Silurian, and they kind of branched from there. So then you get the split between the lobe fin fish and the ray fin fish. You had fish with lungs, and so the lungs were lost in ray fin fish. We can actually still see some of them still do have lungs, like what are they called? The bichers. Bichers still have lungs, and reed fish. Whereas on the other hand, the lobe fin fish, like coelacanths and lungfish and our ancestors, retain their lungs, and that's why we still have lungs today. But it wasn't lost in the teleost. It came to do a new function, which was the gas bladder.
Yeah, all these. And by the way, we need to get Bill back in here. He's been awfully quiet. It's disconcerting. But all these things are repurposed for a lot of things. This is what bugs me about Hovind when he says like, well, vestigial organs are something that's non-functional. That's not what scientists have said. Scientists said that vestigial organs can be non-functional, but they're mostly repurposed for something that's different than where they were originally because of selective pressures. And so we know that things like the lungs, the heart, the kidneys, whatever, these have had maybe different functions throughout earlier iterations and earlier species. But they're specialized for a certain thing because that's what selective pressure selected for. There was a person in our community a long time ago that had actually a mutation that produced a new, I believe it was a vein or an artery, I'm not sure, but it produced a new artery in their heart. And they actually had a heart attack. And if it wasn't for that particular vein that was there that shouldn't be there, they would have died. Now, that's a mutation. It's a beneficial mutation. And that if that was passed on, that would have been something that added to the structure, to the heart, that would have been promulgated into the species, that now made something that was more specialized, because now you don't have to worry about less chances of a heart attack killing you if it had a different way to get to the blood supply. These things are just compounded mutations after mutations based upon the selective pressures that select for them.
Yeah, I had an appendix, but it became medical waste after it tried to kill me. So
yeah, I mean, but we don't need. I mean, that's something that's repurposed,
That was
right?
painful.
Bill, do you
Or
want
can
to
be.
add on that real quick? He's awfully quiet. You okay, man? You're muted.
is Bill talking?
No, I still have my appendix.
Oh, do you?
Oh,
Yeah, I still have mine.
mine tried to. Well, yeah, the appendix actually. It's really fascinating because Darwin predicted that the appendix function changed based on diet. And as far as primates go, that's correct. It's not necessarily correct for other, because the appendix has repeatedly evolved in mammals. It's not necessarily correct for all mammals, but it is correct for the primates, including us. So, that was a prediction based on that, and it's been phylogenetically confirmed.
Yeah, but Hovind lied about that. Hovind said that scientists said that the appendix doesn't have a function, and they found out that it might still have some kind of residual function for bacterial. And I'm like, that's not what scientists said. And even if it was, which it wasn't, that doesn't mean anything, because what they said was, we don't know what the current function for the appendix was at the time. This was several decades ago. Right. But they've long since done more research, and they do know that it does have some kind of bacteriological for biota and I think breakdown of pork or something, but it still has some kind of function, but it's not a function that's critical to survival. And this analogy, when Hovind says, well, let me remove your coccyx and see how that works out for you, that's a fallacious argument that he knows is fallacious.
Yeah,
it's just rhetoric. They're trying to mislead people.
Oh yeah, that's true. No one's saying that. In very early on, some people were saying, like Darwin was saying that originally he actually changed his views on vestigial structures as his works went on. If you read Origin of Species, he says the rudimentary structures are functionless. But then just a few years later, when he wrote Descent of Man, he updates his view to they might have some different or reduced function later on.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's for a long time, actually, if you read the technical literature, which I encourage you to do, some researchers suspected that the appendix had a function because it is associated with gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So basically tissue that is part of the immune system or whatever. And so they suspected for a long time that it had some function. They just didn't know what, and it wasn't until we developed better methods for testing that
Exactly.
hypothesis that we could figure it out.
Cool. Well, I got a lot of research to do.
Yeah, well, I would recommend go to a community course and just take some biology courses, man. I mean, they're fascinating. I mean, I wish I could over again, because when I took biology, I got to tell you, all I did was rote memorization. I didn't understand shit. We took the Krebs, I learned the Krebs cycle, glycolysis, electron transport chain. We had all that. I didn't know what the hell any of it was. I just regurgitated for the test. It wasn't until last 4 years where I went back and reviewed the stuff that I learned and went, oh, this makes sense to me now. I get it. No freaking way back in college if I talked about electronic transfer chain, would I have made any sense whatsoever. I just knew the answers to the test and regurgitated it. It was pure rote memorization. But once you start learning about that kind of stuff and you say, oh, I get this now. At least basically. I mean, I'm not a biologist, but this is what I think that you should do. You seem to have an interest in it. You seem to have a thirst, but I guarantee you're going to find out that everything you've been told about creationism is wrong. And I'm not talking about Christianity. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about theology. I'm talking about a very scientific perspective. Everything you've learned about creationism is fundamentally flawed, and students who go to college with the younger creationist mindset, usually one of two things happen. They don't understand the material and they flunk, or they realize they're wrong and they change their views. Because it's not tenable to have the position that you hold in any academia. This is why younger creationist academics, if there is such a thing, none of them are taken seriously. They get, some of them get, like at Anthrogenesis, I guess they kind of make them have degrees in the fields, basically so they can wave the degree around and say, haha, I'm a geologist. That's all it is. It's for show.
They do not care about the literature. I know, and if we had RJ Downard in here, he could talk for hours and hours about it. Years. He could talk for hours and hours about anything. Yeah. But I mean, the point is, we've both read, and we're currently reading, because we're currently writing a book on all 4 of the new Answers books, the Answers and Genesis books, regarding their chapters on evolution, paleontology, and geology. They're just fractally wrong across the board. Then they really don't care. They kind of act like they don't really care. They don't really address much of anything. They ignore most of the literature, and they promote blatant falsehoods.
Is a great community getting an acknowledgement in your book?
Some of the people, in fact, maybe some of the people here might have already been mentioned once or twice.
I had David S. said he was going to mention me in one of his books. I'd throw
Yeah.
it. Dude, I love that kind of stuff. I love that people are writing stuff, and people ask me to write a book, and I was like, what the hell would I write a book on? I don't know what the hell I write a book on. But let's get some questions here.
I've got a question for Jeremy.
Yeah, go for it. I'll get the live chat questions.
I've met several people lately, and I mean, not just online, even in person. In fact, we have a local humanist society that has a executive director who, as recently as 6 years ago, was a young Earth creationist. And I think the danger with young Earth creationism, like Steve was mentioning before, is that when people get older, they go to college, they start to learn things where they, let's say you're really interested in paleontology, or you're really interested in any field where you have to learn about long ages, deep time, and that kind of thing. If you're going to take the courses and accept it and actually pass the courses, you have to agree with what they're teaching. And I think with this one person that I was just talking about, at least with him, that and some of the debates that he listened to, it just changed his mind. But what happened with him is he left Christianity altogether. And we see that with some people. We see that with people like Paul Entz, Apologia, They go from one extreme to the other because they're so angry that they've been lied to.
Mm-hmm. Paul's been like that. Wayne was like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, do you see that as a risk factor with yourself if you were to accept some of the things, or do you think that you could hang on to Christianity and just modify those views that have been ingrained in you?
Well, I'm not considering leaving, so I don't know. I mean, I'd have to cross that bridge when I came to it. If I did accept an old universe, then I'd have to make that decision. But I don't think I could tell you what I would do now.
Well, don't you think the honest approach is say, look, I'm stumbling in the dark like everybody else. What's going to get me to the truth? And analyze the science for what it is, not from a religious point of view, not from a faith-based point of view, but analyze it from an ontological point of view, and then lead that to where you think it's going to lead you as far as a religious point of view. Because if God exists, He does not want you to believe bullshit, right? He does not want you to believe something that's false. And don't you think that He's going to lead you wherever He's supposed to go? But it's going to, because the evidence that you have that you can evaluate, and what we can evaluate demonstrably, not even a question of if, it's demonstrably showing that young Earth creation is false. Now, you could say, well, I understand all the evidence shows it's false, but I'm going to believe that it's true. That, to me, I think is in a very irrational position. That's not the mind of a rational person. Unless, you want to say something along the lines of, well, miracles happen. I know that you can't have a baby without, having, impregnation of some kind. But I believe that God came down and Mary got pregnant. Okay, I understand people will suspend natural law for miracles. But young Earth creationism is not asking for suspension of law. What it's saying is science shows us the Earth is young. That is wrong. There's a big difference in their narrative there, and you might want to look at that.
And I think we've already addressed that they need to say, if it's faith-based, they need to say it's faith-based. Like I'm saying, they're
not going to say that.
But they're not going to say that, right?
That's not what science is about at all. If you have Andrew Snelling, who's like, I'm a heavy-duty geologist, which he has published actual geology papers where he acknowledges the age of the Earth. But in his literature for Answers in Genesis and ICR and whoever, he's not going to say that. He's just going to push the narrative, which I encourage you to, fact check these guys. Don't take their word for it.
Yeah. Well, what do you guys think about comets? That's a big one. That the saying is comets shouldn't exist.
Yeah, that's again Hovind's argument. The short-term and long-term periodic comets. He's absolutely idiotically wrong on that. Yeah,
I don't even understand that argument because
he argues that the Eukaryotic cloud hasn't been discovered, which is irrelevant. That's the argument.
I mean, we don't. Science doesn't say that all comets have been on their same course that they're on now since the beginning of the universe or even the solar system. Science tells us that that this comets can be bumped into the orbit or pulled or pushed into the orbit by gravity or whatever that they're into currently, that they don't have always have had to have been in that same orbit. So the lifespan of comets orbit has nothing to do with the age of the universe at all.
I mean, even still, the very best it can do is put like a minimum age, right? And so some comets have, based on the astronomical studies, have lifespans of like tens of thousands of years, which is still, way older than the creationists say the universe is. So even still,
it's
way not in favor.
Even a huge bigger difference than 14 point something billion years.
Still, it's not in favor of.
Yeah, I got astrophysicists will come on and tell you there's absolutely nothing with the comet model that it's incongruent with the age of the universe. Absolutely nothing. Short-term periodic comets, long-term, some come from the Oort cloud or some come from the Kuiper belt. But we know that these bodies exist. We know that they're on the edge of the solar system. We know that we've discovered many different planetoids in these regions, right? Sedna, Make. There's this, I can't think of some names of them, but there's a lot of them. These types of rocky, icy planets. We know that some of these smaller ones probably could come in to be comets. But yeah, that's not an argument. But okay, so let's get some questions from the live chat real quick because I'm ignoring them. Sorry. Somebody asked Dapper Dino, who just had his 100 sub spectacular. Yay! He says, I want to know if Jeremy knows about the transitions from primitive synapses to mammals. So the synapses to mammals transition. Who's RJ can probably talk to you for 5,000 years on.
Yeah, he's written a whole book on it too, so you can check that out.
Yeah, I don't want to get into too technical stuff, but Jeremy, you want to look into one thing about the reptilian transition. There's a couple bones in the jaw that in reptiles, and these bones you can actually see through iterations of speciation migrated their position, and they kept migrating their position, and they changed size and they moved. Do you know what those three bones are now?
No.
Well, two of them are now.
Two of them, okay. Which one, the anvil and the sternum?
Yeah, the angular and quadrate?
But I mean, the
dentary is
common names. But these are the bones of the inner ear.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can actually see how these structures came about over many iterations from early reptiles. They were part of the jawbone, and then now they're specialized for hearing. This is a repurpose. This is why we're considered to be repurposed reptiles in that regard.
And we actually... Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Isaiah.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember where I saw this, but they were showing possum, not embryos because they're already outside of the bone, but developing possums, and they actually show these bones starting in the jaw, and then as the possum begins to develop, they'll move towards the ear.
It does in all of us. Yeah, all mammals. It does that. It starts off as in the jaw, and then they migrate upwards, which is awesome because the knowledge of the jaw to ear transition is so well understood that paleontologists actually made predictions about it back in the early 1900s. They predicted specific ways that the jaw would have conformed as these bones were moving upwards, which is this whole group called the probanignathids. Very specific prediction of that. That's how well they understood the transition, or understand it.
This isn't a question, it wasn't a comment, but Darkin says, I went from younger creationism to atheism over a course of 1.5 years, and I see that often, Jeremy, believe it or not, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. People ask anybody about me, I'm the least hyperbolic when it comes to this stuff. I criticize atheists to hell and back sometimes when I think they're being hyperbolic what they say, but this I actually agree with them. I think creationism probably converts more people to atheism than atheist advocates. I see a lot of people become atheists because of creationism, because they realize they've been lied to. They realize it's been wrong. And I personally have seen this over the years, and I'm sure Bill and Isaiah and Jackson probably could have seen similar things. It's very common that creationists feel like they needed to get rid of everything once they realize that they've been lied to about this, right? So they're like, oh, well, if that's wrong, then the whole God thing is probably wrong. Now, I don't necessarily think that follows, but I definitely understand the sentiments, right?
Yeah, I don't see myself rejecting God. It would be rejecting the Bible if if that were to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if that would necessarily follow, but all right, Kawasa 5,000. We got some super chats. Okay, great. Because you know what's fun? I don't know what it is, but lately, have you guys been having problems on your guys' channels? Pretty much every video gets demonetized nowadays.
Not at all.
really me. I haven't done that.
Really? Okay, well, screw you.
My stuff is very non-controversial. I'll have you know.
I would say that one out of every three on this channel gets demonetized, but on my other channel, the Great Debate Community, I would say it's like 80%. It's like every one. But
Well, you're doing mostly live shows, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, and I'm not, you know. The only time I get demonetized, well, I'll put in like a clip from the Flintstones or something, and the person that owns the right to the music still ends up getting the money from the video.
Yeah.
But I don't see it at all, no.
I see it a lot. Kawasa 5001. What would be the most decisive? Quote, I can't deny this evidence that would make you refuse young Earth creationism, Jeremy. So he's basically asking you, there's got to be, to be rational, to be open-minded, you've got to have something that you could say, if this happened, this would be enough to convince me that it's wrong. What would be your breaking point?
Mm.
If one of us, God himself came down, Jesus himself came down and said to Jeremy, dude, you got it all wrong, man.
Yeah, I mean, it'd have to be something like that because,
Okay. But at least
like I told you, I consider it a miracle. Like, it would be like drinking the wine that Jesus made from water. It's like if I knew he turned it into wine, even though I know wine has to be aged.
But that's like a flat Earth saying, well, I'm not going to believe the Earth is round, even if I saw it with my own two eyes. At that point,
Yeah, but that's something they can observe. Like, I
you
can't
can observe this
I can't
too,
go
believe it
back.
or not. Everything we told you is observational.
Well, I can't go
That's
back
true.
in
Pretty much.
time. I'm saying
You don't have
I believe he made it with age, and so
You
if
don't
I
have
believe he made it with age, then I could observe the age he made.
But what's the point of that? If you made it with age, again, have you ever heard of the Omphalos hypothesis?
The what?
Omphalos hypothesis.
Hmm.
Okay, go look it up. It's basically a type of last Thursdayism to say that God created everything with age. Let's say we were created a minute ago with memories all intact. We would have no way to falsify that. We have no way to validate that.
Right.
We would just have to, for whatever reason, you want to accept it, but there's no evidence one way or the other. It's useless in your ontology to think that way. It adds nothing to your framework.
Right.
Because-
yeah. If you look at, like,
It's
you know, all the
unfalsifiable.
radiometric.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. If you look at all, like, the radiometric methods, which are all telling us that the Earth is billions of years old. Well, the ones that can tell us the Earth is billions of years old. You know, then Steve's right. It doesn't really make any sense. You gain nothing out of it.
Except you're adding a trickster god to the works. God's
Yep.
lying to you because
Yeah.
Philosophically speaking, if God created the Earth 4 billion years ago before you even existed, or he created it 1 second ago with all your memories intact, is there any difference to you? You wouldn't notice any difference either way. Why would he do it one way over the other way? You know, it just makes no sense to you. Because in one way, he actually did it, and he's not lying to you. The other way, he created it yesterday, and he's lying to you about how he created it.
Well, I mean, why would he make
Bible
it
doesn't say
14
that.
billion? Why would he wait? Why would he make it 14 billion years ago? If the goal, you know, the God of the Bible,
question.
if the God of the Bible wants to have a relationship with us, why would he have, you know, started 14 billion years
Well,
ago
that's a good
and
question.
then waited a very, very long time just to have the first Homo sapiens?
But that's
you
a
know.
question against theology, not against the science. That's a
Right,
that's
that's
a
I'm
question
saying this is
atheists
a
would bring up.
For
It's a
me,
good
this is
question for atheists.
theological. This is not science, and that's why I'm saying, you know, it won't change because of science, because
Okay.
it is, to me, a theological belief.
One nerd versus $10. Here, have some money. My favorite kind of super chat. Here, hey, take a couple bucks. Appreciate it, man. That pays for that actually pays for my entire video because I'm swearing I'll get demonetized. But yeah, no, I think that's a theological question. You're right. But again, that's a good for an atheist to argue. Why would God? And I argue this to Dr. Swirsky. He wrote a book called "Who's Afraid of the Multiverse?" And swears. How do you pronounce his name, Dr. Swirsky, isn't it? Yeah, Swirsky. I think that's how you pronounce his name. But anyways, I asked him the same question. If the multiverse is true and we're spatial temporary locked from the rest of these modules out there, or nodules, from this level 2 universe. So in a level 2 universe, multiverse, there are separations of universes such that they're isolated to each other completely. There's no causality between them. And if those were the cases, that we can never ever visit those things, right? We are spatially locked from them. And not even Doctor Who in his TARDIS could get to them. Then I asked him, why did God create them? And we
Yeah, I don't believe in the multiverse.
Well, but again, he does. But why? In that case, theologically speaking, God wouldn't need to create them because we would never ever see them. It's pointless, wasted energy. And his response was, "Well, God is infinite; he could waste that kind of energy because it's not wasteful to him because he's infinite energy." I'm like, "Yeah, but it's pointless." So
well, and it could also be
questions of that.
If that were the case, that could be something for Are you aware of the new Earth? According to the end of the Bible, God's gonna destroy this universe. He's gonna make a new universe.
You mean the eschatology version of all that?
The new heaven and the new earth. What's that?
Well, that's called eschatology, the study of
endings. Yeah, right. So that could
the earth is translated to a higher state. It's translated and transcends. Yeah.
So maybe then we could teleport to these other universes, but I don't think that's the case.
Then we're outside the realm of
kind of angels on the head of a pin at this point.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good point. Transistor Carmium, $5. Jeremy, if you're afraid of, quote, bending scripture, why are you not stoning adulterers or adhering to any of the Bible's clearly ill-advised dictates?
Yeah, he's probably talking about the Old Testament. So, and most people, they don't realize that there's an Old Testament and the New Testament. And
most people realize that, man. Come on.
Well, I'm sorry that they
we're not that biblically illiterate.
Completely different things. So what the New Testament teaches us is that the law of Moses is probably what he's referring to, the Old Testament law. It was to prepare us for a Savior. God wanted to take Israel and have this separate people, and he had laws for them. And then when Jesus came, it overwrote that, and we no longer have to obey. I don't have to be circumcised. I can eat pork and I can eat shrimp, and so I can have two fabrics that are different and sew them together. And so yeah, we no longer. If you read the New Testament, then it's very clear we don't have to obey the Old Testament law.
Yeah,
that makes the law subjective.
Yeah.
There's kind of there's no like moral absolutes.
Because God, we can get into the whole moral thing another time. That's going to take up way too much conversation.
Oh, sorry, you're right.
Yeah, I mean,
there's teaching in the New Testament of what to do, what not to do, but it's very different than the Old.
Yeah, but I think that no offense, I think that apologists kind of discount the Old Testament for just hand waving it away. Yeah, I don't think they take a lot of into account because the people that say we'll say homosexuality is wrong, but we're not going to stone adulterers. It's the same Levitical code.
Right. Yeah.
By the way, I don't know. Somebody says the audio level. I've had two people say that, but I can't adjust individual audio levels because I'm not NDI right now. But I'm looking at my gauges, and the speakers here in the chat are at the same level I'm at. So I don't know why.
You sound fine to me.
Yeah, somebody said I'm 10 dB higher, and I don't hear it either or see it in my meters. Okay, so question for Jeremy: does he believe owning another human being is wrong?
Slavery,
or sexual domination? Whatever.
Gosh, good question. I really need to study up on that because that is covered in the New Testament.
What did you say?
You have to study slavery? If it's wrong or not? It's kind of an odd way.
Well, yeah, I think it's wrong now. Like having someone as your employee, of course, back in the day.
That's the same thing.
That's not what owning someone is.
What we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, but
we're not talking about the military. For example, Isaiah is owned by the government. He is governmental property.
Yeah,
that's not slavery, though.
Property. What do you mean?
Right, yeah, I'm talking about,
well, it's not considered to be slavery. When you're in the military, it sure feels like that. Don't get me wrong, but it's not considered slavery.
I think it's wrong. But in the New Testament, even Paul told a slave to return to his owner.
That's not condemning slavery.
Yeah, here's the thing.
Right.
The morality aspect of slavery. People will say, well, I'm going to defer to some thing like the divine command theory, which is called ethical subjectivism. I'm going to say it's wrong because God says it's wrong. And then people argue, well, does God really say it's wrong? Because in the Old Testament, no, he does not. Jesus never even says much about that. So there are ways to treat your slave, and God can clearly not only condone it, but explained in detail how to do it properly, right? So that would be the argument how that would go. Me, I don't fall into divine command theory. I think it's actually detrimental to building a good ethical framework, because you're basically taking all the problems that we have to solve in our lives when it comes to ethical considerations, and you're just giving them to God and saying, look, I'm not going to solve these things, whatever God says. that's not how you build a good ethical framework. It doesn't teach you how to solve ethical questions. And when somebody says, well, slavery is wrong, I, as a non-believer, can say it's definitely wrong, and they'll say, well, that's absolutist. Well, not necessarily. There's things called act utilitarianism. There's rule utilitarianism. There's different things you can appeal to as far as consequentialism, whether you're talking about situational ethics or you're talking about, like I said, utilitarian, which is on the other side of things. But there's different ways you can approach these things, right? But I, as a non-believer, can definitely say slavery is wrong. I'm not a moral relativist, right? I'm not even a subjectivist. But when we ask you a question, slavery is wrong, do you not see how weird it is that you actually have to think about that and go, yeah, I haven't really looked at that. Most people will say slavery is wrong. Now, whether they can justify it or not, that's a different case, right? I don't think a lot of them know how to properly justify something. But I think most people would say slavery is wrong unless you're some kind of, racist, which you're not, clearly.
Or G-Man.
Yeah, well, G-Man, yeah. G-Man actually thinks slavery is quite all right, I think. Do you know G-Man, Jeremy? Lucky you. I'm so envious of you right now. I want to be you.
I've actually never talked to him either, though.
G-Man has a weird definition of slavery. He thinks owning his cat, he thinks his cat is his slave.
No, he has a weird definition of everything. Real quick, because I know we got to go here real soon. Isaiah, will you do me a huge favor? Because I didn't watch this debate the other day. But can you kind of reiterate and recapitulate the gist of G-Man's bizarre way of explaining things during that debate the other debate?
Yeah.
I didn't watch it, but you did. So you told me, and I thought this was hilarious. Somebody else mentioned what you do, by the way.
I had actually caught 2 snippets of it. G-Man was having a debate with what's his name? Jim. You had him on your channel.
Mm-hmm.
And G-Man defines kinds, and it's in a really strange way. So when G-Man is asked to define kinds, G-Man says at or above the allele frequency, like word for word. It doesn't make
Isaiah
sense.
told me this earlier before we went live, and I damn near died laughing.
Well, so speciation is a changing kinds by his definition.
I don't even know. I don't know how to parse his definition.
Is he taking like?
I can't give that much principle of charity. That's just a stupid statement.
I mean, it's at allele frequency. There is no singular allele frequency like in any population.
He said at or above the level of allele frequency.
So if the allele frequency changes, like even microevolution means a changing kinds by that definition.
And that wasn't where he stopped. He was asked. They were talking about the resources on the Ark among things, and apparently goats don't need water.
That's the other thing he said. Goats don't need water. Now, granted, there are species out there that can get a lot of the water from other sources, right? I mean, squirrels can get water from nuts and from grass and plants.
Well, sure.
But I guess they clarified, and again, I didn't watch this. I'm going to have to now. Damn it, Isaiah. But they clarified with him. He's like, no, goats do not need any kind of water. I'm like, do you understand that animals need water? I mean, it's just...
all animals need water?
So, Jeremy, this is a creationist, by the way. G-Man is a creationist. This is the level of just what the hell that we have to deal with, because even you, as a creationist, would not agree that animals don't need water, I would assume, right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, can I get back to the slavery thing? Yeah. So I mean, we know
go for it.
Jesus clearly taught. So we're talking New Testament that the greatest among you is your servant. So every person is supposed to try to serve the people around them. So even if they own servants, and then back in the day without cars, it made more sense for people to live with their employer.
I don't think you really want to go down this route. What you're saying is you're kind of condoning slavery because it was beneficial to them at the time, making it more right.
It also doesn't sound like the slave African Americans were not employed by whites to pick cotton.
Oh yeah, that's wrong. I'm talking about
what slavery is.
I don't think they were considered to be employees at the time of the plantation.
That's.
Did they have health care? Did they get 401k? I don't think so.
So forced labor. What I'm talking about is the situation in the New Testament where Paul tells the guy to go back to his, the person he worked for, and so
that's not a condemnation of slavery. I mean, God could have, or Paul could have just said, "Hey, slavery is bad. how hard would it have been for for Paul or for God himself to just say, "Don't own people as a rule. Just don't do that." But he didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, God. I mean, you would think God would be like, "Hey, guys, it isn't set up this way, right? I mean, people have their autonomy and their sovereignship. You shouldn't take them and force them to do things against their free agency, kind of thing. Because God's really big into free agency, yet He was fine with their free agency being taken away from them. And I'm using free agency differently here. Yes, I'm equivocating. I realize this for you.
But I mean, even still, the laws make sense when you put them in their historical context, right?
But not religious context.
I mean, yeah, these are obviously not absolute morals, because we consider slavery to be immoral, but the Bible's okay with it. This was going on in that time, which is precisely why they're subjective. They're not absolute morals, because they were built in a time when slavery was.
They're more relative. When you're talking about societies, they're talking about
relative. They're relative.
Cultural relativism, right? You're saying that back then they were not immoral because it was relative to
everyone was doing it, right?
Yeah, and I'm not a cultural relativist. I think that actually things like slavery is wrong now. I think it was wrong back then. They just didn't have access to that moral fact. They didn't know about that moral fact. They didn't realize that slavery was wrong. That's the difference between me and a moral relativist, a cultural moral relativist. I don't think morals change like that. But morality is a very, very complicated subject, man. It's one of the most complicated subjects.
Jesus' tactic was interesting, because it was very passive. It was very just trying to change.
Did he? No, he didn't.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Rhetorical question. But Jesus never condemned slavery.
No, I don't. I don't think directly.
I would think that if God came down Himself and He's and again, I'm not trying to bash on Christianity, but He's the Son of God. He's only down here for a little while because lifespan. He knew he was going to get crucified, especially because nothing before like the age of 32 or something, or 33. He hasn't even known about Him barely.
Right.
Very little. But He should make things important. Like, hey guys, you screwed this up, man. We never told you guys to own people. He talked about divorce. But He didn't talk about slavery. What's more important?
Right.
People
He talked about love your neighbor as yourself, and that includes everybody. That's every human.
Your neighbors. Well, no, again, that's
not the same thing, man.
Interesting, because neighbor in that context was the Israelites.
Yeah,
when they talk about their neighbors, that's their specific tribe. That's your close friends and relatives of your tribe. They're not talking about, oh, hey, that tribe over there.
No, they're talking the guy living next to you next door.
Well, that's the Good Samaritan story. That was the whole point of that. The Jews did not like the Samaritans, and He broke down that barrier.
Well, no. I mean, in the Levitical laws, and they're talking about like.
Oh, I'm talking New Testament, though.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they're still practicing slavery in the New Testament.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So, but as Steve was saying, there are things that could have been stressed that we today think probably should have been stressed.
We got to start wrapping it up, so I'm sorry to cut you off. I want to get this under 2 hours because people ask me that day, why do you keep it under 2 hours? Because it renders almost instantly. You don't have to wait, and it gets uploaded, and it just saves time, and it's just it's easier to digest under 2 hours. But let me ask Jeremy one more thing. And when it comes to the slavery thing, if things hadn't changed, if society hasn't changed, if cultures hadn't changed, if abolition hasn't changed, if people, became aware, this is probably not a good thing to do. If God still allowed slavery, would you think it's moral today? Or would you go against God and say God is not moral?
Yeah, based on what He said, to love your neighbor as yourself and do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, then doing something like controlling and owning someone would be against that.
But God's allowing it. If God allowed slavery right now, things never changed, and we still had slaves, and it was part of the.
So if it was in the Bible to have like in the New Testament,
nothing's ever changed. It didn't. The New Testament didn't change the Old Testament. Loving your neighbor doesn't have anything to do with slavery. There's no overlap. No, it doesn't.
You're controlling someone.
I can love somebody and have them as property.
No, that's not real love. That's not you putting their desires above your own.
Now you're throwing your own subjective values here. Come on.
I mean, it also depends on how you interpret the Bible, because during the Civil War, there were people on both sides arguing that the Bible either supported or condemned slavery.
And by the way, I know a lot of plantation owners that love their slaves, if you know what I mean. They called it rape back then.
So let's say this. Okay.
But But let me ask.
First Corinthians.
Let me ask in a very clear way, because I think you're kind of dodging this. If God said, even today, if all the pastors out there and all the churches said, hey, you know what, slavery is just fine, would you stand up as a moral individual and say, this cannot be the case? Either God's wrong, or I'm not going to go worship that type of deity, however you want to phrase it. Would you make a moral stand? Because I believe slavery is always wrong. Because, again, I'm not your typical person out there that says, oh, I'm a moral relativist, I'm a subjectivist. No, I have a very well thought out moral framework, even though even I haven't reached some conclusions yet. It's that difficult. But would you say slavery is wrong if that was the case?
Yeah, I'd have a very hard time believing that God. Yeah, that was the actual word of God. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if the New Testament didn't exist and all we had was the Old, oh yeah, I'd have a really hard time.
See, I respect that answer. Thank you. Will you guys respect that answer? We'll leave it at that.
Sure.
Good. Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Okay, because I got a lot of people that basically said, well, whatever God says, and I think that's not a good way to build your own framework of morals, right?
The reason why I trust God is because I've read the New Testament and I'm like, man, this makes sense, and I think this is good in God's word.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, you know what, Jeremy? Thank you very much as always. I'm sorry you couldn't bring your friend on here, by the way.
That's okay. Thanks for having me.
But we'll have you. I told you I'll bring you in probably once a week or once every other week, or you might, you want to get some notoriety for your channel, and I'm okay with that, even though your videos are getting downvoted with the shit, man. But hey, you know what? You're throwing your hat in the ring. You live and learn, and you're getting to know a lot of cool people. So maybe there's some influence that can happen for you.
Yeah, nice meeting you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah,
Bill,
nice to meet you.
Always a pleasure. Plug what you got to plug.
Yeah, well, again, I've totally revised my creation science fiction website, so creationsciencefiction.com, and it's really a good resource now for disputing creationist arguments. You can literally go there and find on the Refuting Creationism page, you can find alphabetized links to over 50 creationist arguments now, and it's growing every week. Also, I have a creation science fiction YouTube channel. Some different content on there than what I upload to my just Bill Ludlow channel. Sometimes I kind of test things over there, to see how it goes, or I post things there unlisted for my Patreons, the people that are supporting me there, so they get exclusive views on things. My Creation Science Fiction Facebook page, there's content there you won't find it anywhere else, and some really amazing discussions go on there too. So Creation Science Fiction, it's all over the place.
All right. I can't type today. By the way, somebody's like telling me thanks for monitoring the chat. I haven't really paid too much attention to the chat as I normally do today. No offense. I had a lot of people in here to talk to, but yeah, I love the chat. I think the chat is an integral part. By the way, when we started the Non Sequitur show, I had to convince Kyle to actually have the live chat. I was like, you don't understand that the live chat is importance, but he didn't want to have it. Little fun fact. But anyways, Isaiah, you got things you want to plug? You got 1 minute. You actually got 30 seconds here because I'm ending this before 2 hours.
Yeah, just follow me on Facebook, Chucky Darwin.
Thank you, buddy. It's good seeing you, man. I'm so happy that you're doing well, man. Now get the hell out of the Army and come join us again. We miss you. Jackson, you already kind of plugged yourself. Jeremy,
my channel.
Yeah, we know who you are. Screw off. You're going to be more famous than any of us. No, plug your channel real quick. Jackson?
Oh, sorry. It's just my name, my channel, Jackson Wheat. Check me out. I'm on Twitter also.
Smart guy. Jeremy?
Atheism versus Logic on YouTube and Facebook.
Oh, there you go. Guys, thanks a lot. We're going to be having talks like this frequently. It's not the new Non Sequitur 2.0, as people have been saying. No. I'm still going to do things my own way, my own little hangouts kind of stuff. That's all these really are discussions. But we are going to have some other things coming up. On Sunday, we've got Sarah Michelle at 5 a.m. Pacific. Yeah, I know, early in the morning. With Lizzie, the biologist. We're going to be talking about trans and sports. Yeah, we know that. We love that topic. Yeah. I hope that doesn't get watched. But they want to talk about that. And we're also going to be having Dr. Garrett Merriam on Thursday. We're going to be talking about AI emotions with Sarah. How do you like that? If you guys don't know Dr. Gary Emeritus, he's also known as Sisyphus Redeemed. Go watch his videos on YouTube. He is one of my favorite PhDs in philosophy. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't even have an interest in philosophy as much as I do. At least he definitely shaped that. So with guys, I'm ending the stream. Thank you guys very much. Leave comments, like and subscribe, all that other stuff, and good night.